morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Caribbean Gender Empowerment Forum. Thank you all for being here with us on an early morning. My name is Wazim Maula. I lead the Caribbean Initiative at the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Latin America Center that's based in Washington, D.C. Like I said, thank you for everybody joining us, not just here in person, but virtually. For those of you in the room who don't know, this is being live streamed, not just back in Washington, but globally as well to the broader public. You can find it later on YouTube if you would like to rewatch it, especially my remarks. It wouldn't hurt. It's great to be here in Guyana. Guyana is home for me, so anytime I have an opportunity to travel here and just engage with all the stakeholders here, it's especially important for me. Today's Gender Empowerment Forum is an important occasion. It comes on the heels of months of work with UN Women. And with that, I'd like to thank UN Women and the Spotlight Initiative in partnership with the European Union, not just for their support, but for their thought leadership and partnership as well. Before we begin, I think it's important to give a little background and context of our work with UN Women. Our objective writ large is to work with civil society actors, government officials, but also the business community to help at an intergenerational way address some of the challenges that women and girls face in the Caribbean, with a particular focus on Jamaica and in Guyana. Those 4 priorities for us are addressing gender-based violence, looking at economic empowerment, improving political participation, and also looking at the disproportionate effects that women and girls face with regard to climate change. I want to take a quick moment to thank all the civil society organizations that are in the room, but all of you that have worked with us across the entire Caribbean, attending multiple one-on-one consultations and private roundtables, including some capacity building sessions yesterday. Just last month, we were in Jamaica, working with a group of civil society actors, looking at addressing gender-based violence and looking at economic empowerment. And today, we turn our attention to Guyana, looking at climate change, looking at the importance of political participation for women and girls in our political system. We have a wide-ranging and dynamic agenda ahead of us. We will have framing remarks from Representative at UN Women, Tony-Ann Broadber, an intergenerational fireside chat, and we'll wrap up with 2 important panel discussions. But before we can begin, I have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker today, Her Excellency Arya Ali, First Lady of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. The First Lady is a staunch supporter of equality and environmental sustainability here in Guyana, leading several initiatives, including the Menstrual Hygiene Initiative and the National Beautification Project. Her work has also strived to be inclusive of all persons with disabilities and has launched the Adopt an Orphan Initiative. First Lady, thank you so much for joining us. And with that, I would like to welcome you on stage for your keynote remarks.
Oh boy, I'm looking at some names. Mr. Wazim Maula, Associate Director, Caribbean Initiative. Dr. Julian Smith, Mr. Noto, members of the diplomatic community, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Ashmin Mahadio, 32, shot in the neck by her fiancé and succumbed on November 13th. Ramona Lal, 32, stabbed to death by a male companion on November 12th. Nirvana Algu, charred remains found in a torched car on November 12th. These tragic incidents, all of which occurred this week, were a sobering reminder of how women are often viewed and treated in society as property, disposable property. Today, the importance of advancing justice for women is more pressing than ever. Crises generated by challenges linked to, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, demographic and technological shifts, as well as violence and insecurity, including gender-based violence and harassment, undermine our fundamental human rights and affect women's chances of building a good life for themselves. This is a threat to economic growth and human progress. I wish to therefore underline gender equality as a matter of social justice, allowing equal access to rights, resources, and opportunities. UN Women has established through research that based on current rates of progress, women and girls will not achieve full equality with men and boys for another 300 years. Can you imagine that? 300 years? Every day we hear rollbacks and threats to the rights of women and girls believed were secure. I don't think any one of us here fancies waiting another 300 years for women to be treated with the level of dignity that we deserve. So I want to focus today on two factors which are critical to not just achieving gender equality, but accelerating it: education and economics. Education lies at the heart of our call to action. We have long established that education is a fundamental right, yet there are a number of factors which deny our girls the right to education. 2 years ago, I launched the Menstrual Hygiene Initiative, a period poverty project which provides sanitary pads to all secondary school-age girls in Guyana. More than 30,000 girls are currently benefiting from this initiative. I launched this project after discovering that there were girls, particularly in the hinterlands, who were forced to absent themselves from school when they experienced their menstruation because they either could not afford or access sanitary pads. In a study conducted by the Ministry of Education in 2021, 84% of almost 4,500 girls between grades 6 to 13 said that they had to miss school between 1 to 8 days per year due to their menstrual cycle. 17% of the girls reported that they either missed a test or final examination due to their menstrual cycle. And what were the end results? Learning loss and lower academic performances. Meanwhile, 54% of the respondents said that they used substitutes, either a cloth, sponge, instead of sanitary pads, while 53% reported that they required financial assistance to purchase those pads. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, education is critical to building agency, equality, voice, and power. Yes, power for our women and girls. Our intervention in this particular area must therefore be bold, and so nothing less than transformational will be necessary to ensure we truly equip our girls for the future. And while we make progress for girls, we must not forget about the thousands of women who have already missed out on education. They need different educational support, as well as access to childcare services, technical and vocational training, training in life skills, and decent paid work. This brings me to the second factor, economics. The reality is, when more women work, economies grow. Women's economic empowerment boosts productivity, increases economic diversification and income equality, in addition to many other positive development outcomes. Unleashing the economic power of women must therefore be high on our agenda. The World Economic Forum's 2022 Gender Gap Report highlights that women's economic participation and opportunity has actually regressed, and we are facing a massive 257 years before gender parity can be achieved. There are a number of reasons why this is happening. Women face greater hurdles than men in almost all spheres of economic activity, including access to finance, assets, technology, good quality jobs, peer-to-peer networks, and of course, training opportunities. Only 55% of women globally are engaged in the labor market as opposed to 78% of men. Women on average devote 1 to 5 hours more a day than men in unpaid domestic work and childcare, and 1 to 6 hours less a day than men in market activities, and that list goes on. With our country experiencing unprecedented growth and rapid transformation, it is important for us to ensure that our women are not excluded from the opportunities which are being made available. It is important for us to bring the world's largest excluded group into the fold, and for us to do so now. A year ago, I launched a scholarship program in partnership with the Ministry of Public Service, through which women who are victims of domestic violence can pursue studies and training at the Carnegie School of Home Economics. Additionally, my office, in partnership with a local maritime school, is currently providing technical safety and oil and gas training to 100 women from the hinterland. These are opportunities which will provide women greater access to opportunities in the labor market, and so these are the kinds of interventions we can make to support the empowerment of women. Important in all of this, too, is ensuring our men, and by extension society, dismantles those patriarchal structures and values which have long inhibited the growth and mobility of women. The struggle for equal pay, equal treatment in the workplace, equal representation in leadership, and equal access to training and career-building opportunities has been a long and hard one. But we have made steady progress. More women now occupy senior positions in government. More women have access to training opportunities. More women are benefiting from our housing program. More women have become business owners and are receiving financial support, and that list goes on. But we need to build upon those successes and invite other stakeholders to support our efforts. When we transform education and the economics of our societies, we transform the trajectory of gender equality. We must therefore seize the opportunity now and together. Thank you.
Please turn your attention to the screens for an important message from Tony Ann Broadberg, representative from UN Women Multi-Country Office, Caribbean.
Hello, my name is Tony Broadberg, and I am pleased to join you virtually today and to welcome you to a Caribbean Empowerment Gender Empowerment Forum being coordinated under the European Union UN Spotlight Initiative and through the partnership between UN Women and the Atlantic Council. Many of you will already know that the Spotlight Initiative is really a pioneering partnership between the European Union and the United Nations to eliminate violence against women and girls. The Spotlight Initiative is innovative only because it has been backed by an unprecedented €500 million investment from the European Union. This is the largest investment of its kind in this issue of ending violence against women and girls. This is a transformative, impactful partnership that focuses in the Caribbean on family violence. Unfortunately, in the Caribbean, gender-based violence and family violence in particular persists not only as a major public health issue, as identified by the CARICOM heads, but also a socioeconomic, a human rights issue, and a development issue. These issues cannot be addressed in isolation. We must acknowledge that in order to address violence against women and girls, and family violence more specifically, we need to do so comprehensively. And that's what the Spotlight Initiative does. This particular event aims to connect policymakers within government, civil society, and the private sector so that we can chart a mutually reinforcing and beneficial path towards gender equality and empowerment in Guyana and the wider Caribbean acknowledging that eliminating violence against women and girls is critical to be able to do so. Gender equality is a benefit to all and is the number one predictor of peace. In a world right now that seems even more conflict-ridden than ever, this is one key way to address it. Gender equality is not only a sustainable development goal in and of itself, but it is critical to achieving all of the 17 sustainable development goals. Now, Guyana is leading in many ways. Kudos to Minister Prasad and, of course, President Ali for leading the Gender Equality Forum that was held from the 1st to the 3rd of November, where we highlighted better practices, not only those that Guyana has done, but those across the region. Additionally, the private sector in Guyana has set a strong precedent, with over 17 companies in Guyana signing on to the Women's Empowerment Principles through the Spotlight Initiative. And many of you know Guyana is the only country in the Caribbean that adheres to the Beijing Platform for Action recommendation and guidance for 30% quota of women in parliament through the political parties' quotas. In closing, I really want to say that, as indicated before, we know it needs a multi-sectoral approach, but it is obvious that the political leadership in Guyana has demonstrated the political will. The civil society across Guyana has demonstrated as well their passion and dedication to addressing this issue, and the private sector has stepped up to indicate they too are here and ready to act, to end violence against women, to promote gender equality, and support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in Guyana. Have a wonderful session, and I do hope I see you in person soon.
Please welcome to the stage Gillian Smith, representative of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and Sheena Henry, student representative from the University of Guyana.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this pivotal fireside chat within the European Union United Nations Spotlight Initiative program. Today, we explore the crucial intersection of women's political empowerment and addressing gender challenges in the Caribbean. In the face of climate change, understanding the role of women in politics becomes paramount, especially in safeguarding the well-being of women and young girls in our region. Without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our esteemed panelist, Dr. Gillian Smith, as the Food and Agriculture Organization representative and the UN system rep in Guyana. Dr. Smith brings a wealth of expertise on climate change's impact on women. Her extensive background, including a PhD in marine sciences, uniquely positions her to guide us through this very much important conversation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gillian Smith.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I just want to indicate as well that I'm really here and happy to be representing Yeshim Orok, who is the UN resident coordinator here in Guyana.
Today's discussion will explore how expanding women's political participation can contribute to addressing gender challenges in the Caribbean, namely gender-based violence. Additionally, it seeks to understand how women can best be protected from the disproportionate effects of climate change. Can you say what role the UN is playing in Guyana and across the Caribbean to achieve both those goals?
That's a little bit challenging, but I will certainly try and do my best. First of all, maybe I just want to indicate that between the remarks from my UN colleague, Tony Ann, and Guyana's First Lady, Mrs. Ali, I think we've really had a very good context set for us about the issues and very well articulated some of the challenges and opportunities that a dialogue such as this hold. We know in the Caribbean, most of the countries here are considered small island developing states, and that comes with them a particular susceptibility to climate change. We also know, and on a day-to-day basis, we feel the impacts of climate change, but we know that these impacts of climate change also affect our ability to produce, our ability to grow and and export and trade in our own food.
Right.
Our ability to ensure that we have social protection services that meet the persons who need them the most. These adverse effects on our day-to-day livelihood actually impact our Caribbean countries' abilities to continue to do what we all want to do, which is to grow. We want to grow economically and socially. Because of this, or we know also with this, that women, unfortunately, are disproportionately affected by these impacts in climate change. We know that their livelihoods are impacted. We know that we also know that natural resources on which our livelihoods depend are also impacted. So maybe I can introduce 4 ideas that the UN is supporting, and the UN supports the work of the countries. The UN supports their development agenda. So the first thing that the UN does across the board is we help to provide information. We help to link in all of the countries the key information that is required for decision making.
Right.
As an example, I would say FAO has worked along with the Bureau of Statistics here in Guyana to implement what we call FIES or FIES. People have different ways to pronounce it, but it is essentially the Food Insecurity Index Scale, Experience Scale. And the idea of the Food Insecurity Experience Scale is to use statistics to collect good and specific and accurate data on who is experiencing issues in affordability, being able to afford the kind of food that they need, people who are experiencing issues in finding the right kinds of foods that promote healthy, productive lives. For the first time in Guyana and in other countries in the Caribbean, 1 or 2 other countries, the country has the ability to measure its own food insecurity. And this is going to be extremely important in helping to target the kinds of support and the kinds of policies and strategies that the government and development partners of the government help to find or to support the most vulnerable. So that's one thing. The second thing that the UN does is we support livelihood programs. And we do this across many different perspectives and from many different lenses. FAO, I will speak of FAO because this is the area that I know best. We provide support to farmers, fishers, and foresters in terms of producing better, being able to be more productive, and also being able to link with markets that allow them to have better economic circumstances. Other UN agencies do a lot of work in livelihood programs as well. For example, UNICEF and World Food Programme work with women and youth in particular from that perspective of the lens of the importance, the differentiated needs that men, women, children, boys and girls have, the things that they specifically need to allow them to maximize their best lives. In the case of adults, to maximize their livelihoods, and in the case of women in particular, to support them to be able to be good gatekeepers of the nutrition of their families.
Right.
2 more really quickly. The third thing is we help to provide data collection. The FIES, the Finding Food Insecurity in Experience Scale, that's a very good example. And finally, we help to provide platforms for advocacy, platforms that help women to voice their concerns, to voice their preferences, what they need in order to be able to become their best selves. When women are able to be their best selves, we know, I think First Lady said it much more articulately than I did, we know that when women are their best selves, they help communities to become their best selves. They help the country to become their best selves. So maybe I'll just leave it at that for the moment.
How can the UN work with important stakeholders, such as the government and CSOs, to build off its recent progress?
Another very good question. I think maybe the way I see it is that the UN's support comes to the country's development agenda. As an example, in 1980, Guyana signed on to CEDAW. And in signing on to CEDAW, the country made a commitment. It has demonstrated this commitment. It has continued to demonstrate its commitment to ensuring that all forms of discrimination against women are eradicated. This is something extremely important. So the country already has in place a program. The way we work is to provide added support. Whatever we can do to support and improve and build on that. As an example, the Spotlight Initiative, the work we've done with the Spotlight Initiative, works very heavily with the programs that are already in place and also draws in, I would say, all of the different stakeholders, particularly civil society. We know that civil society and the work they do is extremely important to being able to round out the context and being able to bring all hands on board to what is really a very complicated but extremely important problem to solve.
Right, and in the end, it is a collaborative effort.
Exactly so. I'm glad you said that. It really is collaborative effort.
Yeah. Can you say what improvement looks like in the short to medium term?
I think improvement in the short to medium term would include being able to build on already existing programs and support. There are some excellent programs that support women at different phases of their development, at different phases of the gender-based violence problem. We need to be able to build on those and scale them up. I think that's one thing. I think another thing that is very important is that matter that you mentioned of collaboration. We need to be able to improve and really build on the existing platforms of collaboration. Build them out, provide them with personnel, provide them with support in terms of best practices from around the world that might be useful to Guyana and to the other Caribbean countries. Lastly, I think it is vitally important that we have a little bit of a change of culture. Gender, we speak a lot about gender mainstreaming. We really need to put that into action. Gender is not just the the Gender Affairs Bureau. Gender is not just the few people. Gender is a matter for everyone. If every man and every woman, every boy and every girl can maximize their potential, that is what is going to lead to the vision of development that the country is looking for, that all of the countries of the Caribbean are looking for.
Exactly. Shifting slightly, our final question addresses the pressing issue of climate change and its specific impact on the women population, particularly in rural productive areas. In your capacity as the FAO rep, you have had a front row seat to witness the effects of climate change on women in various areas. Could you elaborate on the main impacts that climate change has created for women population, especially in those rural productive areas?
I would very much like to, and I'm sorry that I don't have the correct document to show you, but there is a document, it's a country gender assessment that FAO did quite recently in agriculture. And I wanted to draw attention to it because in that message, or in that document, the Honorable Minister of Agriculture provided a message. And in that message, he essentially said, the impact of climate change on our agriculture and our agri-food systems is very concerning. It's a very difficult problem to solve. But that, where women are concerned and youth, they are disproportionately affected. They have less access to information that helps them to adapt to the climate change issues.
Exactly.
They have less opportunities sometimes to be able to get capital, to be able to participate in the, I would say, in the ability to get land and to access information. One of the things that a lot of our programs are doing these days is working on implementing technology and technical innovation. We know that a lot of the technological innovation that exists in agriculture works towards labor saving. And labor is an acute problem in agriculture. So any kind of labor-saving device that supports women, that helps youth, that improves productivity, vastly supports their ability to remain competitive in agricultural production. And we want to maintain our agricultural competitivity, our ability to be competitive, because we need to be able to create affordable, healthy diets for everyone, and we need to be able to ensure that the foods and the agriculture and the forest products that we produce remain competitive in global and regional markets. You know that Guyana is leading the 25 by 25 initiative in agri-food systems. Guyana is leading the CARICOM's vision of reducing the food import bill by 25% by the year 2025. The only way that we're going to be able to achieve that, to become anywhere close to it, is if we harness all of our reproductive potential. Our productive potential.
Yes.
And our productive potential really is every man, every woman, everyone.
Child. Yes. Are there any challenges or successes that stand out in your experience?
I think we have to pay attention to the labor. We have to pay attention to the availability of labor. We have to pay attention to the possibilities, the grand opportunities that innovation and digital innovation can bring to agriculture. We also have to use these, leverage them to harness what I think is the most important power that we have, the persons, the people.
All right. As we conclude, we can reflect on the key insights from our discussion today. Dr. Gillian Smith has provided valuable perspective on policies promoting women's political engagement, the roles of civil society and the private sector, and the impact of climate change on women. Your expertise has illuminated our conversation, and we're grateful for your contributions and your engagement here today. Let's carry these insights into action, fostering empowerment for women and girls, and let's continue our collective journey towards a more inclusive and resilient future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I am Valentina Sader. I'm the Deputy Director for Impactful Programming at the Adrian Arst Latin America Center, where I lead our Brazil work. I'm Brazilian myself, but also all of our work on gender and gender empowerment. So I'm delighted to be here in Guyana for the first time, actually. And I wanted to thank every one of you and those joining us virtually for attending, for participating, and obviously I wanted to thank our speakers today. Today's conversation marks the continuation of a series of conversations that we've been having both privately and publicly on gender in the Caribbean as part of the partnership with UN Women Multi-Country Office Caribbean. I wanted to thank UN Women and of course the European Union under their Spotlight initiative for their support. If you missed our discussion in Jamaica, we were just there last month. I encourage you to check our website at atlanticcouncil.org for the full recording, where we talked about gender-based violence and we also talked about women's economic empowerment. We'll now turn our attention to women's political participation as an avenue to addressing some of the gender challenges that we see in Guyana and in the Caribbean more broadly. And for that, I'm delighted to have two incredible speakers and experts joining me today. Now start by introducing Renata. Renata Chuck Singh is the CEO of the Women and Gender Equality Commission of Guyana, where she leads the commission's work to address gender issues, promote the advancement of women in society, and investigate and make recommendations to the Parliament on policies and programs for the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. I'm also joined here today by an Argentine colleague here. Gerardo Noto is the resident representative of Guyana at the United Nations Development Program. Mr. Noto has dedicated his career to public service, human development, democratic governance, conflict management, citizen participation, and the inclusion of women, youth, and minorities. Welcome, Renata. Welcome, Gerardo. Thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, I will dive into this conversation. We've been working on this project for about a year now, but in less than 24 hours that I've been in Guyana, I've actually learned much more about how deeply ingrained gender-based violence is and the vicious cycle that it actually creates for women. Mr. Noto, I wanted to ask you first, in what ways could the lack of or the low representation of women in the political sphere, be critical to the future of the Caribbean and the broader development of the region?
Thank you. Good morning. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to share some thoughts and some of the work that UN and UNDP works in the support of empowering women and gender equality. We've been working all together to strengthen the work of the countries globally and definitely in the region regarding gender-based violence. And in many aspects in terms of developing capacity, strengthening the different support provided to people suffering and strengthening the institution at the executive level, at the judicial level. When it comes to political representation, it's very important is the political representation of women, like other minorities, or in the case not the minority, half the population, is essential to democracy and governance in the countries. And it impacts the whole public agenda. It's not regarding only social or women issues, it's regarding everything. When it comes to women empowerment, it's definitely very important to have increase and more influential representation. The situation in the world, for example, some of the indicators refer to women's in parliament. Globally, is around 25%. The region, Latin America and the Caribbean, show a stronger presence and leadership role in which 35% of parliamentarians in the region, in the whole region, are women. And in countries in the Caribbean, it's a different situation, but there are some countries really playing a leading role. Guyana is one, in which you have 35% of women parliamentarians. We have a strong presence in the leadership of the government of the country with 7 ministers in very influential portfolios. We have strong leaderships in other countries like in Trinidad and Tobago, in Barbados, just to mention a few. And that's impact definitely the whole public agenda and raise normally issues regarding gender-based violence, how to cope with it, the legislative transformation that requires, and particularly programs and policies to really strengthen, because this is a problem at different levels, in the society as a whole, but definitely in communities and in the family. And we have to respond to all the different challenges at the different levels.
Renata, building off of that, is there a way there, is there a correlation there to think of how gender-based violence might have been a potential deterring factor for greater women's representation in politics, but also women's leadership overall?
The short answer is yes. Violence has been a deterrent, and it's been a deterrent for a couple of reasons. One, in the political space, it is not the usual space for women, first off. Violence, of course, discourages it. In Guyana in particular, we have the lived memory of violence around our election times. People remember it, and then they expect it. And if you expect it, then you're going to think twice, particularly as a woman, because the responsibilities, your care responsibilities rest heavily, most often on women. And the other thing that we have is that we come from small societies. And small societies indicate that we have relationships of a certain intimacy with everybody. Everybody knows who you are, everybody knows who you're related to. And when we want to practice harassment and intimidation, we tend to, we'll go after you or we'll go after your family. So that acts as a further deterrent. So you've got cultural deterrence, you've got the threat of violence and public safety and personal safety. And then you have the intimidation of that factor that is there. So what we don't also have are organizations specifically who are currently working on increasing women's participation, particularly in public spaces. And so I think that is something that we need to pursue more of, with more vigor.
Thinking, you mentioned the cultural aspect of societies that are smaller in the sense of the Caribbean. How does the nature and structure of Caribbean cultural legacy contribute to some of the political challenges women face when they're affected by misrepresentation, for example?
It does affect it, affect women's participation. But we have to overcome it. And I think with the work that we've been doing with respect to women's empowerment, with having the quota structure or system in place, I mean, it could be better. We're only at 30%. We'd like to, of course, for Gender 2030, we'd like to improve it to 50%. But we need to create more support networks for women so that in the face of challenges, you have somebody there in your corner saying, go for it. We got your back. We have to create spaces where women who are already politicians, women who are already in leadership spaces, are turning around and stretching out a hand to mentor younger people, new entrants into the spaces, so that they can feel encouraged and empowered to pursue their, I don't want to say dreams, but aspirations in the political space.
Absolutely, their path. I think that this was something that we heard already today about how the need for encouragement for these leadership roles too. Gerardo, UNDP puts an emphasis on governance issues in their work in Guyana. To which extent does female political representation tie to broader governance challenges in Guyana and around the Caribbean overall?
No, as I mentioned before, I mean, it's impacting all the different levels. And I think when it comes to promoting women's participation, I think we had to look into the barriers and support systems. There are some very important role played by leaders, women leaders. I mean, we have countries in which you have women in important leadership positions, so that's something that we have to take advantage of and engage broader system. The other thing is that in heterogeneous societies like Guyana and many others in the Caribbean, we had to look into more detailed analysis of what are the challenges. There are cultural, there are religious, there are family challenges, and again, different ethnic groups present different challenges. It's a particular situation in terms of the hinterland and indigenous communities. And the other thing is looking into how we can ensure bigger and broader access to finances, to capacity development, and also to the support required to promote and run for office and play influential roles. Digitalization is a fundamental dimension. More and more digital tools, social media are used for campaigning. So how we ensure that the capacity is there to take advantage of that, how we ensure access to traditional media in which women candidates can enjoy a fair share of the spaces and time for making their position known. And in that regard, we are supporting with the government, a strong effort, a project financed by the GRIF, which is it's a carbon credit system set in a few years ago with the support of Norway, in which we are creating hubs of ICT in every village in the interior. That will open not only the possibility for receiving better e-services, but also open up a window to interact with the whole society in the world. And there is a strong effort in terms of supporting women. I just came from Lethen, Region 9. From Friday, we have a graduating ceremony. We are training the managers and the community developers that will engage the communities to enjoy the possibilities to access these new technologies. And out of 31 candidates in Region 9 that graduated on Friday, 26 were women, indigenous women, young women accessing a new capacity, and with the commitment to really engage with the community and really benefit all these groups.
Thinking about breaking this vicious cycle is a whole of society approach, like we were mentioning earlier as well. Renata, the government has an essential role to play here, especially on accountability. But how can government and civil society organizations collaborate and strengthen cooperation to promote the role of women in these spaces? And in what ways can the business sector and the media alike be allies in this process?
I think the first thing women have to recognize that because we make up 50% of the population, we have a certain amount of power. And I think that power can only be realized if we work together. We have exercised that power in certain areas. I think when we passed the Termination of Pregnancy Act, it cut across all borders. The whole, the parliament all voted for it. When we wanted to deal with issues of national sovereignty, we cut across all borders. So it demonstrates that power, that political power, political capital exists if we were to channel it in the right ways. Now, if women were to channel that, certain issues around violence, I think, would be better handled. For the want of a better word, better handled. I think we should have had a much better handle on it, because Guyana is still one every two women still suffer from violence. We also have to, because you have that power, if you flex it appropriately, people will take notice of it, inclusive of the media, inclusive of private sector. And if you do that, the issues that are important to women, that are important to humankind, will get addressed appropriately and in a timely manner, were we to flex that political power appropriately.
I have a question to both of you, actually. Thinking about the cultural aspect, thinking about the political will that we already see, what is the role that men have to play in this too? Because it's very important and very easy for us to talk here about how women need to be part of this conversation and they need to be in leadership positions. But although they are half of the population, there is a barrier there when it comes to culturally speaking, as well as the structure of the system overall, in how we can have men actually advocate for women's rights. So how do you see men playing an important role here in pushing this change forward?
Now, women empowerment and women gender equality is a human rights issue. It's a development issue. It's not a women's issue. Is anybody serious about that, and I consider me one of them, is that we had to work for that equality. And we had to engage more and more men, because definitely a traditional perspective and education and family raising many times run against that. So there has to be a very conscious effort and more programs focus on the role of men when it comes to women's rights, and more has to be done in that regard. And again, leadership roles are very important, and therefore the role of significant, influential women and men showing the way is a way to go.
Do you have anything to add?
Yes. So, because of the system of patriarchy, men have a certain privilege. What would be helpful is if they recognize that they have a certain privilege and apply that appropriately. If they recognize that your privilege gives you certain access, certain encouragement, I guess, is another word, to do certain things, you have to understand that half of the population is being left behind. So if you recognize that, you make appropriate moves to ensure that you take the time to listen, you take the time to encourage, and you give respect. I think that's the chief way men can actually give women the access to ensure that they take their full place in political spaces and in decision-making spaces. When we hear remarks as though, that are disparaging to women, that are made by men in these spaces, it serves as somewhat of a deterrent. But unless you have thick skin, you'll say, I don't have time for this, I have other things to do, I don't need to listen to bad stuff. So first of all, men have to be sensitive, they need to be aware of the realities of life and how it affects women, and respond appropriately.
And they need to raise the flag too, right? I think this
Yes.
is something else that they actually need to advocate for these rights as well.
They do need to advocate for the rights, but if you don't understand why you're advocating for or the necessity to advocate for the rights, we're talking in circles.
That is true. That's true. Thinking about the actors that need to be involved as part of this change. We mentioned the government, we mentioned men, we mentioned women, we mentioned the business community and civil society organizations. But then turning to you, how can UNDP and other UN organizations, how can the international community best work with the Guyanese government and Caribbean governments overall to advance the political representation of women?
No, UNDP globally in the region has a very strong role working for governance in general and empowering women. In alliance with other UN agencies, we are strengthening the capacity of leaders, women leaders, opening up possibilities for young and also young women to really promote that leadership. And there is issues about institutional capacity, how we can strengthen mechanism for institutions to really open up spaces, give opportunities for women. We are working with parliaments, with Women Caucus. We are working with candidates. We are working with training for media and the new technologies. And again, there are institutions in which we are supporting to open up spaces like political parties, because within the political parties, institutions and mechanisms, there has to be also enough opportunities and space for women. So we are doing that, and as I said, looking into the new technologies, the new challenges and new opportunities, and we've been doing that in relation. We are supporting here the government too, and we continue to do that. There are elections coming in 2025. There is an opportunity to step up that role and particularly ensure a bigger and broader participation and representation of women.
This is something that the First Lady mentioned, education being a key, a key tool for us to have women being represented everywhere, not just in leadership positions. What do you think? How do you think that education can be a driver of this change? And in what ways can education maybe be refined to be able to have men also be educated in this effort, as part of this effort? Either one of you, both.
Let me take a stab at this.
Lots of thoughts here.
The Women and Gender Equality Commission has in the past, for previous election cycles, been going out into communities to try to encourage women to be part of the political process, to educate them on the intricacies of governance, on the electoral practices, so that they are aware of what to expect, how to navigate those spaces more effectively. And I think more of that has to be done to encourage women to get involved. I mean, a lot of times they don't know. It hasn't been on their radar. Why would I try to go up into political space? Nobody's talked me into it. Nobody's encouraged me into it. But I think the more you know, the more confident you become, and the better you're able to be in those spaces effectively. It should be taught in schools. What is the civics process? How do you form a political party? What does it take to get yourself on a ballot? What kinds of issues you need to be acquainting yourselves with? What are you passionate about? What are the changes you would like to have? If those are the things and the issues that we deal with in our schools, then, and we graduated all the way through our education facilities, and it's backed up by community programs, I think you will be able to change the landscape of the situation.
When it comes to the role of different institutions into empowering women, I think education has a very important role in general to educate women and men. And there has to be the possibility to strengthen the capacity of leadership at that level. Another space in which is very important is how women and in general people develop capacities in civil society as leaders, how they engage with issues that they care about, how they promote those issues, be it environment or violence against women, or human rights, or whatever is the case. And I think that leadership is an excellent developing tool to promote bigger participation. Also, political participation is not isolated in itself. It's related to how society and small groups like family works, the values that they have, so they have to open more and more spaces to that. And economic empowerment is the other side of the coin. I mean, there are some interesting examples in Guyana now of the new recently allocated area for exploration on oil and gas. There are a local company just managed by women, which is, I think, is a powerful tool. I mean, examples of leadership roles in politics, in the economy, in the society are excellent images and incentivize looking into people trying to engage into that. But again, support, access, and capacity development are fundamental, and that's what we will continue to do here in the region in general.
Absolutely. There are multiple steps and needs for us to be able to address something like this. To wrap up, I wanted to ask a final question to each of you, thinking about the same question to both of you. Thinking about the Caribbean region and the necessary steps that must be prioritized now to foster women's leadership and make progress in reaching equity in politics, what initiative or policy change would you prioritize first? And I'll start with you, Renata.
So Guyana is the only country in the Caribbean that has implemented quota systems on the CEDAW, which allows governments to employ special and temporary measures. The governments of the Caribbean could start with that. Let's have some sort of quota system to get people into the parliaments, into leadership positions, political leadership positions, and you can move from there. Backing up on that, or coming with that, should be the education support, the mentoring, the basically the familiarization with what the issues are and how they can speak. And then also women have to have the confidence to come together and to act together on issues of mutual concern across the Caribbean. We are very vulnerable, for instance, to climate change. As a whole, the Caribbean is one of the most violent places in the world, particularly when it comes to gender-based violence. These are issues that women can coalesce around and be able to bring those issues to the forefront and actually legislate more effectively on what has to be done.
Gerardo, over to you, but I think you gave the perfect segue into the next conversation.
No, definitely there are many things to do. I think building up on the strong leadership from women, mentoring, tutoring are very important. Looking to ways to develop capacities of young women to engage. And the other thing is, in a parliamentary system like in the Caribbean, where you have basically system in which there are unipersonal districts, is very difficult to ensure the proper representation. So we have to look into the selection processes within the political parties to ensure that there is a higher representation and moving into parity. So it gives candidates real opportunities to really win their seats and therefore engage into government.
That is definitely a recommendation that is applicable to the rest of the region as well, not just to the Caribbean, but also Latin America overall. So with that, I wanted to thank both of you for taking the time to be here today, for joining us. And now we're going to transition to a quick coffee break where we're also going to have a special performance. We'll be back in 10 minutes for a conversation on the effects of climate change on Caribbean women and how to address it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We will now enter a 10-minute coffee break before our next panel. And to preview the next panel, which is going to be on climate change, the NGO Merendoy has kindly offered to share a performance with us about climate change. So we asked you to take advantage of the food and coffee selection we have in the back, but also keep an eye out on the performance that will be occurring here in the front. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The performance this midday is definitely from our youth.
start in 2 minutes. And to the panelists, if we can go to the front, thank you very much. Please, everyone, find your seats.
Tell me. Well, good afternoon and welcome back. Thank you to all of you that have remained here both in person but also joining us virtually again. We're at the closing session of this Caribbean Gender Empowerment Forum. So once again, thank you for joining us. At the top I mentioned, my name is Wazem. I lead the Caribbean Initiative at the Atlantic Council. We've had some great discussions so far, and we have an even better one to wrap up the final part of the forum. We've talked a little bit, we talked across all areas from economic empowerment to political participation to gender-based violence, some of the initiatives that the government of Guyana and other civil society leaders and the business community has already started to initiate on these issues. And we've also talked a little bit about climate change. And that will be the focus of today's conversation, specifically the disproportionate effects that women and girls face with regard to climate change, not just here in Guyana, but the broader Caribbean. As most of us in the room know, climate change affects Guyana and the wider Caribbean. I mean, seawall is just right there, and you can see it physically, firsthand for yourself, what some of the things of rising sea levels has done to Guyana and other countries as well. Facing rising temperatures, yesterday at a capacity building session, we talked about the effects of El Nino on women and girls and how that affects them. Look at strong tropical storms, flash flooding in some of our hinterland communities, It's all around. But what the real challenge is that, there's already, it amplifies some of the challenges that women and girls face writ large here in Guyana and the wider Caribbean. And this is what we'll get into today. And we have a fantastic lineup of speakers to help us through this conversation. First, we have Rowena Elliott, who is the president of the Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry here in Guyana, who was recently reelected, so congratulations to her. Rowena's been participating in a lot of our private roundtables, has done some one-on-one conversations with us, and I will gladly say that a lot of the work that we have been doing thus far with UN Women has been informed by your insights and your analysis. Next to Rowena, we have Ms. Leila El Hadrawi, who is representing the EU High Commission here in Guyana as well, and is a notable expert on all things climate change. So Leila, thank you so much for being here with us as well. And last but not least, we have Margaret Lawrence, who's the Executive Director of Marindoy, and for those of you that stayed through the coffee break, saw an amazing creative performance, and that I think will appropriately frame our conversation for the remainder of the time that we have here. So first, I just want to kick it off, right? Go down the line really quickly, and just from each one of your perspectives, what are the types of climate change events that are impacting your constituencies, your communities, the businesses that you run, and how specifically are they affecting women and girls? So Rowena, I'll start with you, and then we'll go down the line.
All right, so am I on? Okay, so thank you for having me on board for the event today. So I think very commonly, as we can see, one of the main things we have here, especially in Georgetown, is from the time the rain starts to drizzle, we're flooded. And so that definitely affects specifically, all businesses, even getting to your office, it tends to be an issue. And I think a lot of focus isn't really placed on the outskirts of Georgetown, because the majority of persons and the majority of photos we see and videos circulating is specifically relating to the town area. But we recently have been seeing a lot of what's happening in Region 1 and Region 9 as it relates to heavy rainfall and flooding. I know recently, within the last couple of months, we haven't had that issue. We've been facing extreme heat, but that also comes with its own challenges as well. I think in relation to women in businesses and girls, you're looking at just access to getting to your work, getting to your business site, getting to school for education. What the panel before alluded to, education being important. We're back to going to school. And those things will impact in that sense, but that's just like the immediate effects in a sense.
No, thank you. It's important, yes, to talk about some of the flash flooding, but the extreme heat as well, and that is something that I had missed in my opening. Leila, please, we'll go to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invite. Yes, for the European Union here, our focus and our cooperation in Guyana is mainly centered on forest, because Guyana obviously is one of we have witnessed now in Guyana for the last few months an extreme dry season, and it also has a devastating impact on forest. Obviously, for the first time actually here in Guyana that we have seen an increase in the number of forest fires, which also requires obviously a different way of addressing forest management. And then obviously how all these forest and other climate challenges impacts people is different for women and for men, and it's very important that we look at these challenges and that we also address it accordingly, with taking into account the negative impact that can bear on women and men differently.
Thank you, Leila. And Margaret, want to go to you on the same question. I think, as the Atlantic Council has been working with UN Women, I think one of the main things that we've learned is the importance of civil society and civil society perspectives, specifically in some of these issues. So we would love to get your perspective on this topic from a civil society perspective.
Yes, thank you, Wazim, and thanks for having me on the panel. as I represent Marundoy, an NGO part of civil society. I just want to quote what His Excellency said at the COSAD in the 26th. He said, "The climate crisis has issued us an ultimatum. Either we take immediate and drastic action or subject ourselves to an infernal global disaster. Indifference and inaction will be costly. Climate change affects us all, but its effects are more severe on the poorest and the most vulnerable." And of course, we always say that women and girls are in the society, the population, the vulnerable population. I think civil society has to join, and they should be given recognition by the government that civil society has a role to play in sharing messages. Civil society is present in regions and areas that the government is not present. And they ought to be able to share those messages, to be part of the national plan, especially to address women and girls. There are members in our NGO community who focus on upcycling, recycling, and of course, most of them are led by women and girls. So that, I think, is the importance in this particular instance.
No, that's great to hear. I mean, the main takeaway there is that, we're talking about the disproportionate effects that climate change has on women and girls, but women and girls are also part of the solution. And I think this has been, we've talked about this not just in this forum, but in previous discussions we've had as part of the UN Women Project. But I want to drill down a little bit on how climate change is either creating or amplifying disparities between men and women. And Rowena, I want to start with you, specifically from your vantage point in the private sector.
I think one of that will come back to the societal roles. Just generally, societal roles of men and women are completely different. And so what you find that the climate change and many other effects, unfortunately, will do is force women back into those societal roles and norms rather than taking a focus on, or rather giving some priority to, if it's their businesses or their employment status, they're going to be forced to stay and resume or take a bigger part. And so one of the things that, and that's, I think, within private sector and any other sector that you look at where there are families. So in addition to that, because of the fact that more women-owned businesses tend to hire or employ more females, you find that the employment patterns will then be kind of like affected, because then persons are going to be losing jobs, or persons are going to be, because of those same societal rules, having to kind of venture back into what the norm was, is to stay at home and be away from their jobs, and creating any kind of solution along with trying to mask the effects of the climate change. One other point on that would be to, unfortunately, businesses tend to, or rather persons in the private sector world, they tend to look at women-owned businesses as not as important or compatible, with higher capacity. Unfortunately, it's kind of like, okay, you're not ready as yet. So one of those things we find is the disparities of trying to mitigate any sort of climate change impacts. There's a huge flood. You may need to cover insurance for your stock, or you might need to get a loan to reinvest into something that has been damaged from your business. What we found is that banks tend to look at women-owned businesses as a bit more vulnerable in these environmental changes. So then that's also going to cause that major disparity, or that gap between men-owned and women-owned, or men-led and women-led businesses in the private sector.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is about, of course, there are direct and indirect consequences to this, but some of this is a perception issue. And it goes back to Margaret's point, talking about civil society being important for communication, for sharing messages. So it seems like there's already some sort of bridge between your objective from the private sector and Margaret's objective from civil society. Leila, I want to get your perspective from the EU on specifically on some of the disparities that climate change can create between men and women.
Yes, so first to start off, I mean, any cooperation or any programs that the EU implement or support. Our focus is obviously, our first focus is human rights and equal rights, obviously, so that is where we look at. And as was mentioned before, climate change and the challenges related to climate change can induce, let's say, disparities and gender disparities more specifically. So that can make or create a change, for instance, in the traditional ways or of livelihood. When we look, for instance, specifically at agriculture, fishing, when that is impacted because of climate change, it can disrupt household also economically. We know that economic stress can also lead to increased tensions within households, which then can lead to domestic violence and so forth. So these are all aspects that come from climate change impacts, and which from a perspective of cooperation and programs that we as the EU want to support and implement, we need to address and also take that into account. And so, as was already mentioned, women indeed have maybe sometimes more a caregiving role, but that can also increase and be actually further impacted during climate change crises, and which then also leaves them more exposed to many other risks. So I think for the EU, what is important is that we recognize these challenges, and that we also address climate change programs, or where we have programs where we respect the gender disparities, but also where we create gender-sensitive policies. Maybe just to finish off by saying that, of course, we do also have to recognize that vulnerabilities are not universal. So it varies greatly depending on cultural, social, economic factors. So we cannot have a one-size-fits-all program or support mechanism. We have to look at different factors, and where climate change has an impact, it can impact on various ways on different persons.
No, thank you. I mean, it's not just, like you said, not just the disparities, but it increases the vulnerability for already a vulnerable population. And there is an importance of creating gender-sensitive policies, taking a gender-lens approach. The Atlantic Council team was speaking to, the University of Guyana yesterday, and we learned about the Gender Institute and the types of gender-lens approach they're taking through that, but also at an institutional level there. So I think when we get to the solutions part of it, we'd love to really hear more and more about gender-sensitive policy and gender-lens approaches. But Margaret, I want to go to you on, are you seeing some of these disparities within civil society, within civil society organizations? I think we've seen a theme from both Marina and Layla on how this affects based on societal roles. Are you seeing the same thing in civil society?
Well, basically, the NGOs within civil society are led by women. And you would find a lot of focus on issues like gender-based violence, as you mentioned, and so on. However, I think what we are looking at now, the focus is climate change and mental health. It is becoming increasingly popular, and it is something that we have done as part of our counseling services and so on. So it's another area that we have to get into. When you also look at the effects of climate change on the family and the household, you know that it is the women who have to take the important part, the important role, the priority. Because if the house is flooded, it's the woman who has to go and arrange to have it cleaned. The men may be around, beg your pardon, but it is the woman who takes on the role. Mm-hmm. So within the whole civil society structure, our emphasis is also on caring and the caregiving aspect for the women. So that is a slight disparity. I think what we're doing now in terms of alleviating the issues and so on is to pay more attention to men, the role of men in gender-based violence. You know, sometimes we just say it's the women who you have to empower, but you have to empower the men because they're part of the solution. They're part of the solution to climate change. We're talking about training the children. It's the men who have to be involved there too. Garbage disposal and the whole issues that affect climate change. We must have some combination of mental skills and services.
Thank you. That's a very important point to bring up, and thank you for raising it. You know, I think the first part of this conversation, what I'm really hearing is this is a call to action. Not just this panel discussion, but not just this forum, but some of the other things that we've done with UN Women. There really is a call to action either to increase the urgency of making sure that we solve many of these challenges in a very sustainable and long-term way, or where there are not solutions already, it's time to create them. So with the remaining sort of less than 20 minutes that we have, want to talk about solutions, right? Each one of you occupy very important positions, a variety of perspectives, and I would hope that by the end of this, I mean, can't come to a solution just in less than 20 minutes, but we would hear individually from each of you what a solution looks like, but maybe how we're working across government, private sector, and civil society. So Rowena, I'm gonna start with you. How is your organization working with private sector to protect against the effects of climate change for women and girls? And you know, what has been working? How can we build on those efforts? What are some things that may not have been working that we can kind of rethink and come to a better alternative?
So admittedly for us, we have not had a focus on climate change, and so that for me is where one thing comes up, which is awareness, to be honest. I've been a part of a few conversations and forums. Recently, I think earlier in the year from the Private Sector Commission, I was asked to attend kind of like a summer course in greenhouse gas effects. And so that was my first interaction with anything of that nature. So that, from that point is where it started to kind of, okay, this is something we need to start looking at in certain ways. So for me, I'm gonna start with awareness. So not just from our end, but one, I need to then look at how we can build awareness within the chamber itself before we can then step out. So we're always open to collaboration and learning and ensuring that we connect with the right people that can give us the information and then use that information to go forward and say, okay, how do we bring about any sort of change? Now, as mentioned, well, you mentioned the institute at the university. I was recently approached by Lisa. So I actually didn't know that there was an institute of that nature, you know, and we've, again, admittedly, so have not built that kind of relationship with the university. So now this is one way, as you mentioned, what do we intend to do? Look at some of the things and the people that we can collaborate with. For us, we have been focusing a lot on building capacity of female entrepreneurs without looking at some of the effects of the environment around us and how it can actually affect them. So that will be from our standpoint, where we start by building the awareness within and then taking that, connecting with those institutions a bit more so that we can create, as you mentioned, think about how the solution and what we can do to help mitigate and help the women and girls through this process.
That's brilliant. I mean, I think that's one of the purposes of putting together something like this, is that we're able to, the Atlantic Council is able to be a convener, right? I mean, we don't have solutions. We have solutions, we produce reports, but it's really, at the end of the day, going to be the decision makers, people like yourself, people like Lisa, people like on this panel that will move forward any sort of solution and see it through implementation. So I'm glad to hear that, and I know that there's an entire room here that will be in support of this raising awareness. Layla, I want to go to you on the EU side. Not just the types of support that EU is providing here, but what does global partnership look like when it comes to sort of building potential solutions here in the Caribbean, specifically in Guyana?
Thank you. Yes, but obviously just to start, of course, for effective collaboration and coordination, it's important to have a holistic approach to the problem of climate change and the impact on it on gender issues. So we need to look at the global picture of it and try to find concrete solutions. I also want to comment what was said about looking beyond only support to women, but also looking at what men needs. And so because gender issues are not only focusing on women, they're focusing on men as well. So and that is really very important. That's also something that we as the EU, we look at this in a holistic approach. I would just like to, if I may, just to give a few examples of what the EU is doing, because it is important in, let's say, more the global partnership. Because we have a gender action plan, so the EU launched an EU gender action plan that looks and focuses on gender responsive climate action. So where we want to support women, girls, and boys to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Our programs that we implement together with the government and together with our partners, and I'm happy to say that Marundo is also a partner with whom we work here in Guyana. Gender is always mainstreamed in all our programs, so whether we deal with climate policies or any other topic, we integrate gender into our policies and our programs. Policies and programs. And of course, advocacy is indeed very crucial within the international cooperation to provide for gender-responsive climate actions, and that we do on local level, but also international level, together with our international partners, such as the UN, of course. So I think there are on several levels that we work with our partners.
Excellent. I mean, so it seems that there's a lot being done, but also a lot more to do. So I think that's a great start. Margaret, want to ask you, you're engaged in this work on a daily basis. You're out there, you're on the ground. What do you, Marandoy, other civil society organizations need to see from government, from private sector, from development institutions? Please feel free to share examples of how Marandoy has worked with these entities in the past. Would love to get a sense. What does civil society need from those actors for us to start making more progress on this challenge?
Thank you for that question. And thank you, EU, for the support. Definitely, civil society is always looking for support, whether it's financial or it's acumen-centered or what have you. But let's start with the government. The government implements policies, and civic society is expected, or we take it as our mandate, to assist carrying out those policies. But the enforcement thereof is a difficulty. For instance, we have laws and so on about garbage disposal, and so how do we enforce it? Why do you have to go down the road and see so many tins and foil and paper flooding the canals and so on? Whatever happened to the law, is it a law, about using the packages that we use to put food in?
Yes.
The types of packages, whether biodegradable or not. But you see other packaging slipping into but nobody enforces the rule. You cannot import such. And where's the reinforcement on that? So there are the policies. We're the watchdogs, the civil society. We have to ensure that these things happen. And when they are taken to persons, to the level that this is what is happening, you need that kind of support. That we have to reinforce these policies. It's no sense saying, well, okay, this is happening and we think this is why it's happening. It's because people have no place to dispose properly and so on, and we recommend, but it's left there. It cannot. It has to be carried through. In terms of the donor and the private sector and the international donors, we've been doing quite a lot. It's up to civil society to access those fundings. Sometimes civil society is a little lax in how they go about doing it, and maybe they don't have their infrastructure in place, that is needed to access donor funding and all of that. So civil society also has the role to play. I want to say, just to repeat something that the UNC says, the United Nations system recognizes the key role that youth play, play in taking action on climate change mitigation and adaptation. We have to recognize that they are the gatekeepers, young people. That is why we joined with UNESCO, and we were able to pull off Youth Slam Climate Change Poetry Competition. And it is amazing the hunger that the young people expressed because they have to go research and find out why this is happening, why emissions are happening. Is flaring, adding to the heat in the environment, why do we need to keep our forests clean and hold on to them? So it's amazing what came out in that poetry. So I think what we would have liked to do is to attract more people. If we did make it open to all the regions did not participate because they didn't have access to the communication and notification of whatever. So if we do it again next year, and we hope the government or somebody will underline like that, or the private sector, that we invest in our young people. They're the people, they're the children who say, Mommy, you cannot throw that paper there. Please put it in a white bag, a green bag, a blue bag. Let's separate our garbage. What about the upcycling, the recycling? We had one recycling plant. I don't know what happened to it. Maybe you can share. I know there's a civic society, the NGO, NCC, who are about to implement a recycling plant. And I hope they got funding from the Japanese, I think. And they were recently granted some land from the government. That kind of investment works. And they're going to start that. But it's something that can trickle in all the regions. We have to take grip of what is happening. As the young lady said in the poetry slam rendition just now, you cannot continue this wanton garbage just disposing. There are things that we can do. So let's invest in the young people. Let the young people carry the message. Let's listen to them. They know how to do it. We are seniors. We might want to use the old traditional ways, but they have some novel ways of getting the message off. They just need the support.
Thank you. That's a very powerful message. The youth being so important because I guess at the end of the day, they have to live with the consequences.
Yes.
Who else has to live as much with the consequences than them? So as we're coming down to time, we've talked about these challenges. We've talked about it across private sector government, civil society, and the EU, of course. What does success look like, right? We're talking about disproportionate effects facing women and girls, women and girls being part of the solution, youth being part of the solution. So it's a two-part question for all of you. What does success look like a year from now? And what does it look like by the end of the decade? And if you have thoughts on how we're going to get there, please feel free to share. So Rowena, I'll start with you and then we'll go down.
All right, so for me, I think what success looks like will be to build a little bit more information and awareness because, as mentioned, the youth, they really are, cliche, the future, but as you also alluded to, they're the ones that will definitely have to continue to live longer than we will in the environment. So outside of that, though, using the young people as the catalyst, the idea as well is just to ensure that the information gets out there, at least for me, in the let's just say the end of year or within a year, is so like the common person can tell you what the effect of climate change is. Because if you ask just a random person, they're probably not able to explain it. And one of the things comes down to trickling down of information. When the government makes policies and the enforcements of it, where does it reach? Where does it stop? And so that is how far-reaching that we need to understand. I mean, everybody will hear about, we're attending COP conferences, but then how many people are aware of what they address there? and how many people actually just pay attention to any one of the speeches, just to say, okay, this is actually happening and this is what we need to tweak. We have so many cars out on the road now. We're running through the license plate range within months. So that in itself was what I think a lot of people don't understand, is also, adding to what's happening in the global hemisphere and just in our space as well. Carpooling, something as small as carpooling could be something that we kind of like push towards. So that's what it is for me within that short-term space, is really pushing the awareness of what's happening, so that anybody understands, the smallest child can understand what it is, and what are the small things we can use to mitigate this, and small things in that, the everyday activities that we do. And that in itself, while we do that, yes, we focus on the larger aspects of how we can go about it, but I really do think like the small efforts can lead to that. So unfortunately, I can't think of that long-term 10-year plan.
No, that's fine. I put the
but
spotlight
more
on you.
collaboration and more of these, and not just hoping that it comes from an external source, like the Atlantic Council and UN Women, but also internally, like the government has a responsibility to educate the population on this, and not just when it's World Environmental Day, or we do the Tree and Earth Day. It needs to really be more conversation.
Perfect. Please, Leila.
Yes, thank you. No, it's a very relevant question, but very difficult to answer, obviously. Well, I think the main message is that climate change is here to stay. It's not going away. There are impacts of climate change, and it's a reality today. Although there are maybe still people that want to ignore it, it's simply a fact. And I think indeed that is something. If within a year's time we could have at least that realization, that would be a very important step, that climate change is something that we need to address, mitigate, and also adapt to. So there is the mitigation, but also the adaptation that we have to face today. And then, of course, if we look at the larger future ahead, to say it, the wise words of this young climate activist, Greta, that we all know, is we should have less blah blah, but more action. So that is obviously what also as the EU, I hope that within 10 years will indeed happen, that we will have more action and less talking.
Thank you, Leila. And Margaret, I'll give you the final word.
I really love what you said, more action, and then we should say, where is the action coming from? And who do we hold accountable for it? However, within the next year, you said? Next year and next decade? I want to see Georgetown, or all our cities, all our towns, clean. I want to see no floating boxes and stuff in those canals. I want to see that we as a people are more aware, and we do, it's action. We do the things that will contribute to it. And we hold each other responsible and accountable. My neighbor, you cannot throw plastic bags, madam, in there, you put it here, Let us be more vocal, and let us hold each other accountable. The next decade, climate change says that by 2030, Georgetown may be one of the cities underwater. And that is what pushed us to do this project, because more and more you're hearing about that. So I want to make sure that by 2030, that I may be able to go on the seawall and enjoy some beautiful Atlantic. I don't want to know that I have to run to the highway and visit a house there because everything has receded and has taken over. So let's just come together and ensure that it happens. No more blah blah, more action.
I love that. So I think that there's no way to protect vulnerable populations like women and girls without addressing climate change, which I think is the main takeaway from this panel. We are unfortunately out of time. I would like to thank, first, thank UN Women through its Spotlight initiative with the European Union for all of the support and the partnership. I would like to thank again the First Lady for providing keynote remarks, but also all of our speakers, our creative performance, our fireside chat. It was wonderful to have all of you here. I would love to thank the Atlantic Council team, my colleagues, Valentina Satter, who was up here earlier, but those of you that did not see what was happening behind the scenes, Martine, Enrique, and Iveta, who is standing in the back. And I would like to thank everybody in the audience, both in person and tuning in virtually. We really do appreciate you spending your time with us. This is an ongoing project, which means that your insights, your expertise, your ideas, all will inform what we do next. So please, we are open and welcome to all of it. Just a quick reminder before we close, we have another Atlantic Council event at 2 p.m. right here in this room, where we will drill down more on climate change, but also talk about energy with the new U.S. Ambassador to Guyana and also Foreign Secretary Robert Prasad. So hope to see you guys there as well. If not, we will definitely be in touch in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.